So I want to talk first about a quote that you said, and then we can go into more history. So there has never been an immortal society. No matter how technologically advanced our own society is, it is unlikely to be an exception. To achieve a positive future that defies these odds, we must understand the hidden forces that shape society. So first, can we talk about history as a discipline? But then also, we just kind of went around that a little bit in the difference of cultures of oral versus written versus maybe multimedia in the future. So let's riff on that a little bit.
Well, I think that the hypothesis I would advance, and it's I admit a imperfect and limited perspective, because as individuals, whenever we study something that's beyond an individual, we always have an imperfect image, an imperfect slice of reality.
Of course.
So having said that, I would say that these particular forms of tacit knowledge that we were discussing before, they don't just apply, they don't just apply to like heart surgery or working on machine tools or cooking. They actually apply in how do you manage human beings, how do you mentor others so they acquire deep skills, how do you resolve political disputes, how do you provide spiritual guidance, this packet of things that I call social technologies. Now, some of these social technologies can be explicated. Codes of law are fairly straightforward, codified, explicated, systematized social conventions, but they ultimately just are that. They are social conventions, right? A law enforced by no one is not a real coordination protocol anymore. It's just a fiction, maybe a legitimacy granting fiction. And of course, legitimacy granting fictions are in themselves a type of social technology. So we have both implicit, explicit social technology, contrasting it with material technology. So a jet fighter is material technology. The US Air Force is a stack of social technologies embodied in an institution, right? So having said all of this, what does it mean to have these differences between oral, written, and multimedia cultures? I think the key answer is that they handle the succession problem differently. Succession here, in this sense, being skill succession, though it also has a separate component of power succession, which we can go into later. Skill succession is essentially that, we as humans, again, we're mortal, our lives pass, eventually we need replacing, right? Our social roles probably fulfilled by other people. Sometimes the roles are obsoleted, but usually they need a replacement, someone of equal or greater skill. I think with oral cultures, the interesting thing is that knowledge is very distributed and local. With writing, knowledge becomes arguably centralized. The reason for that is that writing, you don't need personal contact to talk with someone. It enables long distance communication. It was historically associated with the privileged class. But even if you flip writing away from the privileged class of, Egyptian scribes or what have you, or medieval priests or Chinese mandarins, you end up with a mass literate society, but a mass literate society where only a few places are doing the printing and only a few newspapers dominate national discourse. I can guarantee you that if America was a purely oral culture, there would be no such thing as the New York Times. There would be no such thing as the Atlantic. There would be no such thing as a national conversation. What does that even mean, right? The national conversation is always a tiny slice of all possible conversations that could be had dominating the public airwaves. Now, multimedia I would break down into two parts, right? The first era of multimedia is basically television, radio. Arguably, that's a continuation of print. It's more similar to writing than it might seem, right? More similar than writing because sometimes, writing is what determines what's said, right? Screenwriters here in LA, obviously they form a whole subculture in their own right. And arguably, they were a great uncharted intellectual influence in what people thought. There tends to be a prestige or a seriousness hierarchy where, I've had the experience over and over again when someone was like, oh, I really liked your article. I was like, oh, where did you read it? And they correct themselves. They're, oh, I listened to you on a podcast talking about it. So what's heard on a podcast is attributed to writing. And this is an old phenomenon. People who are basically inspired by movies or TV shows, say someone inspired by Star Trek, might prefer to credit in a public appearance Carl Sagan, or if they were inspired by Carl Sagan, maybe they'll credit Albert Einstein or Feynman or whatever, like actual scientists. So there's a slight misrepresentation of influence, and I think screenwriters are underrated because no one wants to say that they've been influenced by movies, right? It makes you sound brainwashed. But then arguably the 20th century was a century of brainwashed societies, right? So television, radio, it's like writing, but more intense, more visceral. It's underreported. Now, the second half of multimedia cultures, right? The first half would be, radio, television, all of that. The second half is generation by people themselves, right? You have the concept of virality. Now, virality is still tweaked and centrally controlled, but as soon as the video production can happen anywhere, I think there's a much richer, more fertile, sort of, let's call it mimetic petri dish, right? Lots and lots of experiments are run. Some of them are adopted, some of them are upregulated, others are banned and censored, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. But the speed of cultural production, I think, does in fact go up with this technology, all else equal. So having said all of this, cultural production, what about cultural reproduction? It might seem then that we are returning to oral culture, highly localized, person-to-person relationship, arguably the skill gain analog of the three eras would be, master-apprentice relationships for oral cultures, civil service exam for the written culture, and for this, digital multimedia culture, we actually don't have anything beyond the influencer. So there's no real thing that pushes us towards relocalization or succession. The mutations happen locally, but the spread is just as viral as mass media society. So I actually am uncertain how exactly we'll do knowledge replication. One positive aspect of it is that in multimedia culture, mediated through the internet, the world loses a sense of time, right? There's still fads. There are things that feel dated or don't feel dated, but nothing prevents you from watching a series of videos from 2012 or reading articles from 2004. Sure. Things might become viral at strange times. There'll be people reviving a particular thing. Yep. So if there is a way in which multimedia society might solve the succession problem, I think it would be through essentially persistent online scenes and subcultures. You've probably noticed that subcultures no longer congregate around music genres, right? Music genres, arguably right now, the main use of them is for people to emotionally connect with very small groups of friends rather than participate in scenes the way they did in the 1990s and early 2000s.
Like mass gatherings.
Exactly. Well, they would have an established fashion, you would drive you would dress a certain way, you would organize events a certain way, you would have social conventions, there would be a preferred drug of choice that's used at the scene. If it was metalheads in Europe, then obviously they would drink a lot of beer. If it was, it was people in California, maybe they did a lot of acid, whatever, right? I think that was replaced now by online subcultures that congregate for now around aesthetics and other times around particular practices, right? These are, however, substantially parasocial communities where most of the interactions are at a distance, where you are in your head, you have a relationship with this person that you're following online. That person might not know you exist, right? It's not humanly possible for them to know you exist if they have 100,000 or 1 million followers. You might still have smaller chat groups that format out of that. So, to summarize, oral culture, master-apprentice, local tribes, written culture, bureaucratic systems, standardized testing, exactly, and finally, multimedia internet culture, scenes that are very dynamic where people go in and go out, so it's not like tribes, and there's a lot of runaway imitation of the people. Exactly, where you aspire to an aesthetic, right? There's a way to be a YouTuber, for example, right? And there's a whole genre of different ways to be a YouTuber.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.